Hi, my name is Sonia Kapoor, and I am a growth product manager at Merjuri. It's a direct-to-consumer jewelry brand, disrupting the jewelry market. And my background is within growth and marketing, even brand marketing. Um, so have had various different roles within growth marketing and product management.
You started in brand management and then moved into digital. Can you chat a little bit about why you made that change? What drove you to make that shift in your career? And
Mhm.
then how did you make that jump? What were the actual steps you took? Because I think a lot of people struggle to move from these so-called traditional roles into digital.
So my career has not taken the traditional path, linear path. I've definitely made a pretty decent sized career transition from traditional brand management into like a highly digital role now. And one of the reasons I did that was when I was at Johnson and Johnson Brand Management. I started noticing that the industry was changing, not just at my company, but across the industry. Started noticing things like layoffs more happening more often, downsizing, budget cuts, things like that. So this change, although hadn't impacted me personally, I did notice it, and it got me thinking about my career and the long term plan for my career. And I basically started off with thinking about what was important to me in my career. So I did a bit of a values exercise around, things that are important, such as working in an industry that is growing and has a future trajectory for growth. For me, it was really important to have kind of freedom and not stress about, having job security. So that was personally a value that was really important to me. I also looked at obviously things around like what makes me happy and within a role, like things like autonomy, analytics, strategy. Um, and then also lifestyle is so important. So I'd highly recommend everyone as they're making these types of decisions about their career, also consider your lifestyle. For me, it was very important to reduce my commute time. And that's not always an issue for other people, but for me personally, it was. And so that is kind of what spurred me into um, thinking more and more about digital because it met the criteria that I created for myself. What I did to make that happen was a couple of things. One is taking a testing approach because I that's just the way my brain works. And so what I did was I thought digital marketing would fit into my criteria, but I wanted to test it before I made a big move. So started doing a lot of online learning, started talking to people that worked in that industry, and really the more I learned, the more it validated for me that it was the right move. The other thing I would recommend that really helped me, and maybe it'll help anyone else looking to make a career transition, is to be really open to the idea of a bridge role. If you're thinking about your career from like a longer term perspective around values and things like that, it's the long game. It's a marathon, and you might not get that kind of ideal role right away, which was the case for me. I took a role that was kind of a bridge solution, and what is great about that is within those types of roles you can take on special assignments, you can network with the right people in that organization to again just get yourself closer and closer to what that end state might be. And it's great because you might actually learn from that maybe you want to kind of shift direction slightly. So I really encourage people, it really worked for me to take on a bridge role. My role after that was kind of an internal consultant role that I would have never gotten straight from my kind of traditional path. And it was really that bridge role that helped me get there.
You just mentioned and you say it on your LinkedIn profile that you're a hypothesis driven marketer. Um, can you talk about what that means? What does it mean to be hypothesis driven? And maybe ground it in an example of a recent test that you ran?
For me, it's really important to always be asking myself questions about the business and how we could potentially improve. And that really is my take on being hypothesis driven. I will say, though, I'm a huge advocate of grounding that hypothesis in either customer insights or data, so that you are prioritizing the right questions and the right hypotheses. So I'll give you a recent example that's actually especially relevant to marketers, where I was looking at our behavioral data and doing a bit of a deep dive on landing pages specifically and how they perform. And what I noticed were most of our ads were driving to two landing pages. And in general, those pages were not converting well. I was noticing some other landing pages that were converting at like 3 times the rate generally. Um, so I connected with our performance marketing team and had the hypothesis of, could we just try for a certain group of customers to actually drive them from ads to our homepage, which was converting super well for us. And it was a really good discussion because the team had told me they had tried that just like 5 months earlier, and it's the other pages that were converting better. But again, I had a question about that. And it was my hypothesis that for a certain group of customers being our cold prospects who don't know the brand as well, our homepage actually could be a better starting place for them to guide them through our funnel. And so it really was a question. The other kind of piece of context that I provided them was actually our homepage has recently evolved. Like in the last 6 months, we've had made huge progress. And so I encourage the team to basically just test it out. It wouldn't take long. It wouldn't take any resources, no additional resources, test it. And we did that. And what we found was for that group of cold customers, that this new homepage landing page performed at like 3 times the conversion rate. And so it became a strategy with our ads with more than just that test, but across the board around how do we kind of give our cold prospects a bit more of a feeling of our brand. Um, so that's just an example of like it's rooted in data. There's a reason for it. It's not just coming out of nowhere. And it doesn't really take a lot of like, it's a very much an MVP approach. It doesn't take a lot of effort to actually conduct that test. And within like days, we got incredible results.
How have you built a culture of testing and experimentation within your teams and large organizations?
It's really important to build a culture of experimentation. It's probably one of the hardest things to do when working in growth, or an experimentation role, is driving that cultural change. There's some things that have helped me in a couple of the roles I've been in recently. And oddly enough, one of them I stole right from one of Tyler's classes that I took, which is this idea of documenting your hypothesis in a test and a learning card, documenting your learnings, and then sharing that across the organization. So that was a huge, I think the general answer is sharing the results, because it's really compelling the way you can move your business forward with testing. And I think the key is around educating and sharing. So how do you do that? You document in a very clear and easy format, and you share. There's other ways to share. There's Slack integrations that you can create. There's newsletters you can send out through emails, all of which are things that I've done to drive that culture of experimentation. You can get people excited by getting the organization to vote on whether they think A or B is going to win before you even get the results, and really drive that kind of involvement across the organization for testing. So really just finding the right ways to share. The last thing I would mention that's been highly effective is hosting what we call demo days, and really bringing the group together to not only share results, but answer any questions that people might have. You might lose that in a forum like an email or Slack. So I would say try kind of multiple different ways to share. They say it takes 7 times for people to register a message. So be creative and think of different ways to kind of share what you're working on.
Here, how do you balance um, incremental testing with some of the bigger swings that, especially early stage, high growth companies typically need to hit their growth targets?
I think that incremental testing is super important for understanding exactly what is driving the change. But it is also really important to ground your thinking around incremental tests around a bigger idea that can get people excited. Um, so, what I mean by that is potentially having an experimentation backlog that's grouped into certain ideas, and those bigger kind of hypotheses around, for example, what would happen if we shifted more of our resources towards shopping appointments now that we're in COVID? Like, that's a really big question, but you can tackle that with incremental tests and map out, like, in 6 months when you've run, I don't know, 5 of those incremental tests, that actually adds up to a potential opportunity of like doubling the conversion rate for that program. So it's about a balance of, yes, taking incremental tests so that you really understand exactly what is driving and that you're not kind of colliding different experiments at the same time. So it's really important to be scientific in your thinking of how you run experiments, but at the same time, kind of grouping that into a bigger question and bigger hypothesis and having a long-term plan of how you're going to roll out several tests that address that question, to really kind of step change your business KPIs.
Any books or resources that you suggest for folks that are interested in, whether it's experimentation, growth, marketing, or maybe even resources on making the type of career shift that you did?
Some resources that have really helped me, honestly, I would say Medium. I'm a huge fan of, like, some of the articles around experimentation in Medium are absolutely fantastic, just written from, professionals that work in the space, sharing what has worked for them, lessons learned. Um, and I think within this field, one of the most important things is making sure that you're reading up on things like, you know, stat significance, like what is that? How do you make sure that you're running your experiments in a way where the data is valid? Because the last thing you want is people poking holes in that and then losing trust in the work that you're doing. So I would highly recommend that, check out Medium for general kind of experimentation strategy type of ideas too, but also like make sure you brush up on your kind of just basic stats skills, um, and kind of this idea of how to isolate variables in testing and what is a scientific approach for that. The other thing I would recommend for marketers is, because, and I'm seeing this specifically for marketers because professionals within product management are well versed in like things like the lean startup books like that, and kind of courses even around like certified scrum training. I highly recommend marketers get a little bit familiar with these types of principles, even if you don't plan to work in product management. There's just so much goodness to be learned from like a mindset when you start learning more about what is an MVP and how do kind of agile technology companies, how do they approach that? There's a thinking, there's a philosophy, and there's a culture behind that marketers, I think, have a huge opportunity to adapt that type of thinking in their approach, and frankly make yourself more of a modern marketer in that way. It also helps that you can engage with your product and technology teams in a better, more informed fashion. But even without that, it really does, I think, help with um, your purely marketing efforts.